Think Forward. Think Research Channel.
Welcome to School Talk. I'm Nadjia Varney, your host, and we're coming to you from George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. In the swell of political, corporate, and educational demands for school reform, with the focus on standards, testing, and accountability, perhaps it's time for us to just stop and ask, just what is the purpose for changing schools? Well, my guest today believes in transformation, not necessarily reform per se. To transform schools, in his words, to create justice-oriented ways of thinking, learning, and being. Sounds very American, very exciting, but in today's world, almost countercultural. It's an honor to welcome Dr. Mark Hicks, researcher, author, lecturer, and professor here at George Mason University. Welcome, Dr. Hicks.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I'm so excited to talk with you because in this day of reform everywhere, you have a whole different idea about transformation. But first, before we talk about the subject, could you briefly tell me what led you to develop this new concept and these new ideas for changing things?
Oh, it's a long story. I think as with most cases in terms of developing new ways of thinking and being, it comes out of personal experience. And when I think back about my own experience as a learner, one of the things that I discovered is that my experience was very, very traditional. I was a good kid, came from a good family, went to good schools, you know, that kind of thing. But when I look back retrospectively at that experience, it really wasn't one that took me to new places. After I finished my undergraduate work, I then became a university administrator, and so I became sort of the perpetuator of sort of tradition and making sure that systems maintain themselves in one way or another. And then when I got to graduate school, I discovered, you know, there's another way of thinking about this, and I really came to understand how knowledge was created and how systems of language and culture in so many ways hold us back from the potential that we have and the kinds of things that we can do in schools and just as human beings. And so I became very attracted to this idea of transforming, which basically means to think about the assumptions, the values, where your knowledge comes from, how we organize ourselves, and then to, as I say, that cliched phrase, to think outside the box. What would it look like to create new patterns, new systems, new ways of thinking and doing things? And I think it's been very powerful for me and for people that I work with, particularly teachers.
Ah, well, and in your explanation, you did kind of give a definition of what you mean by this transformation. Well, explain maybe, if you could, for me, just what major problems do you feel that this whole idea of transformation would address? I mean, it's not going to, well, maybe it is going to make a higher test score in math, I don't know, but what major problems do you see you're addressing with this transformation?
Well, I work primarily with public school teachers in a professional development degree program. And one of the things that I've discovered and found to be very, very true in school life with teachers is that the same problems tend to be facing them year after year after year, and there really doesn't seem to be a different way of approaching them. And so oftentimes I do a lot of work with art as well, and if you were to think about, for example, working with pottery, a potter might have a piece of clay and you work with it and you can sort of reshape it in a different way. You can paint it, maybe you can add shells or something along that line to the work. And so it's reformed. You can reform it, you can reshape it, but it's not new, it's not different. And so the kinds of things that I'm trying to do is to think about different ways. How can we sort of change the landscape? How can we change the conditions? How can we change the questions that are asked? I think it was Einstein, I'll murder this quote famously, but I think he said something about the reason why that we don't have new solutions to problems is because we keep looking at them in the same way. We keep approaching them from the same perspective. And so what I like to do is to create a different kind of container, a different kind of environment, so that we can have different answers and different outcomes for some of these problems, like you know, discipline and standardized tests, and how they can sort of sometimes can sort of stymie the imagination of the teacher and also of the learner. So how can we change those conditions and create different kinds of ways of looking at things?
Well, it sounds to me that you're really approaching, when I asked you what major problems they would solve, you're really coming at it by changing people, the teachers, and how they look at things, if I'm hearing you correctly.
That's correct.
And that's probably where most of it starts, is with, believe it or not, everybody in the world, it's the teacher. So where do you start with the teacher, with your groups?
Again, another great question. I start with the individual. One of the things that I have learned as a teacher myself is that oftentimes the kinds of learning situations I'm trying to create in the classroom are really much more interesting to the student than to the professor. And so oftentimes what I will do in my work is to, in a sense, I'm losing myself here.
No?
Okay.
This is fine.
Often what I will do is to think about how to about the problem itself. What is interesting to the teacher? What is going on? And when that happens, when the teacher can bring that problem into the classroom, and particularly because this is a professional development situation, when the teacher can bring that problem into the classroom that's important to him or her, as opposed to what's important to me, then that teacher is going to be more interested. They're going to be more invested, and also they will. The teacher will actually find a solution that works for him or her.
This sounds so important to me, because just as when I asked you how you got into this whole field, you went back to your own life. And not many places in education at the higher levels do you have that chance to go back and see what problems are. So it sounds like you're giving them a chance for introspection. But I've read some of your work, and from your description, you talk about something, I think you speak of it as collaborative, inquiry-based approach. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Sort of what you were talking about, but could you elaborate on what you mean by a collaborative, inquiry-based approach?
Well, most teachers, unfortunately, spend a lot of time in their classrooms alone. They don't have the opportunity to work with other teachers to sort of think about the problems that they're experiencing in the classroom from multiple ways, from multiple perspectives. And so the work that I do builds on the best ideas of collaboration. The fact that we all have partial knowledge, we all have partial information. We can't see the world broadly. And so what I need to do is I need to create a community of people who can sit down with me and talk about things and bring different perspectives to bear. And when that happens, when you begin to inquire about these problems that are confronting you, and you do that in community with other people, then you can actually see the problem and come and reach a better solution. For example, a lot of the work that I do deals with issues of culture and language, race, and issues of class and poverty, privilege. Those kinds of things are very much alive in schools, and because we're all embedded in those particular experiences, it's very hard for us to see how we've been impacted by race sometimes, or by class or culture, or whatever the case might be. And so if I'm working with you, trying to figure out how we can close the achievement gap in a classroom, or why Johnny's always sitting in the back of the classroom resisting, being resisted in some way or another, if I can work collaboratively looking at that problem, then it's much more likely that I'm going to be able to solve that, as opposed to closing the door and just sort of suffering through it, and then stereotyping a kid for a long period of time. So the idea of collaboration around issues that are important to address is critical.
What kind of skills how would you describe, or what kind of skills, or how would you describe the skills that a teacher will come away with now, once she's done this collaboration and looking, what does she take away with her, or he take away with her? What kind of skills that maybe aren't given in a typical lecture, professional development situation?
I have to say that a lot of the techniques or skills that I try to help teachers develop isn't anything that's necessarily new. Yes, we talk about reflection. Yes, we talk about evaluation and assessment and thinking about who you are as an individual and thinking about who the learner is and teaching styles and learning styles, all of those issues that are so important to consider. I think what is probably most different is really sort of the sense of confidence that teachers are able to bring to these problems. Schools in a lot of ways aren't, which is kind of amazing to me, they really aren't places that inspire creativity for many teachers. They really sort of
Sadly.
experience schools as places where someone else is setting the terms, someone else is setting the objectives and what is important and what isn't important. And so one of the things that emerges out of the work that I do really is an opportunity for people to actually try things out in different ways. My classroom really, I teach collaboratively, by the way. I never teach alone, which I think is a very important thing.
You practice what you preach.
Exactly. So when when working with my colleagues, one of the things that we do is we create experiences for adult learners, for teachers. And in the creation of that experience, teachers are able to sort of, cordon off, to push aside the sort of traditional expectations. I'm in a graduate school program. Well, what happens if you were to reimagine the classroom as a museum as opposed to a traditional learning environment? What would happen if you were to think about the classroom as an art studio as opposed to a place where everyone is discovering and learning, as opposed to a place where someone, again, comes in and tells you what's important? And so what happens, the kind of skill, the kind of comfort that is developed in this kind of approach is really a sense of confidence, of being able to try different things, being able to make mistakes, being able to ask questions. One of the things that's always fascinating from hearing from my students as they finish the program, it's like, wow, I always thought that I listened to students. I always thought that I really understood what learning was about. But all of a sudden, I find myself actually asking kids in the classroom, what did you learn today? And if they're not learning anything, then I have the ability, I have an opening where I can actually change my practice and create different spaces for the learners themselves. And the kids themselves begin to open up because they know that, wow, this is really a place where I can be myself, I can ask questions, I can grow and expand as well.
Well, if that's a skill, that's almost what you say is a transformation for teachers to go out and be able to open up themselves so that they can open up their students.
That's right.
I can see why you call it transformation, where it doesn't come from outside and imposed on the classroom.
That's correct.
What about evaluation? I mean, that's what's on everybody's mind, is passing tests, but what kinds of evaluation do you support in your teacher preparation and professional development work?
Wow, it's an excellent question, and one of the things I think we really need to do as a profession and even as a country is to really spend much more time thinking about what does it really mean to learn. What really are our values that we're trying to pass along and bring people into engagement with. And I think evaluation fits into that discussion directly. One of my aims for professional development for teachers is to recognize that teachers have an intellectual life of their own. And that if we can figure out a way to make classrooms exciting and vibrant places for teachers, then perhaps students can have that same kind of experience. And so I think evaluation fits into that scheme. Because if teachers are excited and engaged with what does it really mean to learn, to get the kids to really internalize and understand what's going on, then they'll create those same kind of experiences for children in the classroom. And in terms of evaluation, I think that means really figuring out in real time, what are the kids missing? What are they trying to understand? What is really important? And so My experience has been when teachers are bright and motivated and engaged, and children are bright and motivated and engaged, then they tend to be learning, and guess what? They tend to do well on the standardized tests. And so I don't think it's important to even get into that discussion about, you know, can we really, what happens if you only teach to the test or only teach because, you know, what's interesting or what's motivating to kids. I think you can do both at the same time. And one of the things that I'm delighted to see is that it actually happens. In my work with teachers and going into their classrooms and listening to the stories, they find ways because they're in situations and they're creating conditions in their classrooms where kids can ask questions and they can be accountable to the knowledge that they need to understand and to work with. But it's not done in some sort of a heavy-handed, draconian sort of sense of, you know, you need to learn these kinds of things. It's like, how can we open these kind of ideas up? So this is something that you would enjoy learning, that you can learn, and by gosh, they do.
They do.
Yeah,
It's interesting because recently I spoke with a guest, Dr. Anastasia Kitsantas, who talks about self-regulated learning.
Ah, yes.
And that ties so well with what you've just said, that once the child is open and not afraid to not give the right answer or check the right box on a test.
Exactly.
It sounds like this kind of evaluation comes more naturally because they're evaluating as they go along, asking questions, getting answers.
Exactly, and also it also sets a tone for the rest of their life, because I think one of the things that I'm very concerned about, obviously, is how education ties into issues of our civic life. And you know, if we set up learning and evaluation techniques and tools that really sort of set the standards of what you're supposed to get as being set by someone else, what happens when you're 35 years old? What happens when you're 40 or 50 or older, and you need to make decisions about your life and about this world that we live in? So I think it's very important for people to, you know, be able to set their own learning standards and goals, and being able to look at this from a holistic perspective.
Well, that's really, I think Alfie Kohn has written a book called What is really an educated person? What does it mean to be an educated person?
Exactly.
And it's, again, not just the teacher saying, yes, you got it right, but the kinds of concepts you're talking about in this transformation. Would you be able to give us an example, perhaps of a teacher who was in your course and got hold of some of these ideas and then went back to the classroom and saw a difference? Could you give an example?
Oh, wow, there are so many. Again, as I was saying, we do a lot of work around areas that aren't part of a standard curriculum for schools. There are a lot of things that are really important. For example, how socioeconomic class or how race or things along that line impact the way that a teacher understands himself or herself, and also students. And so, I mean, just one example might be a teacher who really sees himself as being, you know, very fair-minded and open and respectful of all students, and might have the idea that, you know, I'm colorblind, for example, and that I see all kids as being the same. Well, after all of my, I spent 2 years with each of my students in this intensely collaborative setting. And one of the things that happens in that intensive relationship is that you're able to have a lot of conversations about your assumptions and about these values and where they come from, and why it's important, why fairness is important to you, for example. And then to actually create experiences where the teacher can begin to understand how race or class or sexual orientation might impact how a student learns and sees the world. And by having those kind of experiences, teachers find themselves being changed, because all of a sudden they themselves, not me, again, the authority figure, they themselves begin to recognize, oh my gosh, I was walking down the hall the other day in the school, and I noticed that there are only African American kids that are sitting in the principal's office. Why is that? What's going on? And 2 years prior to that point, the teacher might not have noticed, or would have said, well, you know, our discipline policy in the school is fine, it's the same, we treat everyone fairly, and the kids probably were acting out in ways that were inappropriate. well, what's behind that? And so there's a sense of consciousness that I think that emerges in these teachers. And so the kind of stories that we hear in a variety of different ways, it doesn't necessarily have to be around that. Sometimes it could just be about my own control issues as a teacher. Sometimes it could be around the best way to teach, because we all carry our teachers in our heads, right? Our elementary school teachers, middle school, or high school teachers. And, you never can critically engage with what that teacher taught you, and is that really the best way to practice for the particular group of children that you're working with? So stories like that are commonplace when I use the phrase when teachers meet themselves in ways that they didn't anticipate meeting themselves, and that's what we really try to do, is to create an opportunity for an encounter with themselves and with children.
I almost hear Socrates sending his blessing, know thyself, know thyself. And we don't usually take time for that. We're taking methods courses and discipline courses and telling the children line up and have to pass unit 4, number 6 on the test.
That's right.
So it's refreshing that you are offering teachers this kind of professional development. You speak sometimes in your work about hope, the importance. Would you speak to why you put an emphasis on hope?
Because again, it's a notion that really is relegated to the margins of our professional lives. It's something that I think many teachers come into the profession because they really want to change the world. They really want to do good things for children. They really want to make our society a better place, and for kids to enjoy themselves and enjoy the wonders of the world. And I think far too often, we don't create environments where people can sort of think about joy, to think about their passions, to think about the things that really spark them or send them into a wonderful place. And so they become hopeless. They see themselves as being, what's the phrase, pawns on someone else's chessboard, if you will. And so one of the things that I like to do is to think about education really as an opportunity in building hopefulness. And particularly for many teachers working in difficult situations, or many children who find themselves being outsiders in a school setting, hope is very important. And so what I like to do is to create opportunities for people to have success, for them to see that what I thought was so impossible actually is doable. I didn't see myself as that kind of a teacher. I didn't see myself as being capable of creating those kind of situations or taking a stand on the curriculum team or, with the administration around one issue or another. And so I've found that the more people can experience hope, the better able they are to actually bring about change. And the more change they make, the more hopeful they can be. So it's a lovely circle that you have to constantly keep going to create opportunities for action and then create opportunities for hope, because hope makes more action and action makes more hope.
That's a lovely thought in that circular way that you describe it. There's almost a spiritual dimension to that, the way you describe it, where everyone gets, their inner strength from. But without hope, I can see where people, especially teachers, do get discouraged if they don't open up. So I'm so glad that this is quite an interesting. I could see where they become a little transformed because it's more than just standard information that we have to pass along to those waiting little sponges.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's great to give us a chance to understand who we are and then allow students to be who they are. And then collaborate. Am I learning here from your speeches?
You're on.
Oh,
you're
good.
On.
I get an A. We both thought of that. Well, most people with great and new ideas, especially if they are outside the box, do find frustrations in trying to bring these ideas forward. Have you run up against, what's your greatest frustration right now about moving this idea forward?
Well, I'm always battling with structures, with sort of institutional power that isn't called into check, that isn't analyzed, that isn't unpacked. And one of the things that I think is a constant frustration for me is is that we have to spend so much time working against those kind of structures. And so I find myself frustrated by the inability to create spaces for this kind of work. I mean, I feel very fortunate that the unit that I work in right now, Initiatives in Educational Transformation here at George Mason, is really a great example of how a group of faculty members and university professors have come together and said, okay, let's create a container, let's create a space that gives us the room to do the kind of work that we need to do. But it's about time, as people talk about time being a frustration quite a bit. But it's having time and space, and when you can have those two things in your corner, if you will, then I think that sort of mitigates that frustration a little bit. But that certainly is something that I think we really need to do, is to think about how we can really create different kinds of systems, different kinds of spaces where people can actually be human beings with each other. It's a good thing.
Well, in just 30 seconds, can you tell me very quickly why you feel so optimistic about this program, or what's your greatest optimism about it?
Because it actually works.
I'm going to have to cut you there and because of time, but I don't think you could have said it better. It does work. You've been working with teachers for a while now.
Yeah.
So thank you so very much for your offerings.
Thank you.
In closing, I'd like to say, in a world where values seem to be more and more revolving around the bottom line and just getting a good job, how refreshing to talk with Dr. Hicks about transforming habits of mind and heart. John Dewey said, "Schools are not preparation for the real world. They are the real world." Certainly a wise and very supportive axiom, supportive of transformational school talk.
Think Forward. Think Research Channel.